Good morning, friends. I hope you're having a good day. Before I get started, I wanted to mention you've probably seen me do this recently on YouTube over canvases. It's called a dirty pour, and I wanted to show you how you can do it over shells, which is just a little bit different, and it's still not complicated, but what a pretty outcome. So I'll show you how we can get these started. I took these plain shells and I covered them in gesso and let them dry. Now I use this product called Floetrol to mix with acrylic paint. This is something you can get in the hardware store, but you can also use 1 part of Elmer's glue or white craft glue to 1 part distilled water and mix it up and use it the same way. Whether you're using the Floetrol or the craft glue and the water mixture, you want to use 1 part paint to 1 part Floetrol or the white craft glue mixture with water. Now it seems to me that the cheaper the acrylic paints, the better this works right off the bat. So even if you find some kids paints, the most important thing is you want the consistency of these paints to be almost like cream. It's got to be a little bit runny, can't be too thin, but you don't want it too thick. And it's not that complicated really. I don't want you thinking I've got to get it just right. So keep adding water if you have to, just to make sure that there's no lumps in there, that this will be like the consistency of a thick cream. And we're going to mix up, you can use 3 colors, 5, 6, 12. To start out, you may want to try just 3 to 5 or 6 colors. And each color has to be in its own little cup. I'm showing you here on the second color that I used, which is the beachiest color I can think of. I'm adding a little bit to the bottom of the cup, and then I'm taking the white mixture, whether that's the Floetrol. I'm actually using Floetrol this time. I'm using the white mixture and pouring in the same amount so that it's almost like a 1-to-1 ratio. And on some of these, I had to add water. Some, they were the perfect consistency just as they were. And because this is so inexpensive of a craft, you don't have to worry too much about messing it up, and you may want to even practice first on freezer paper. Now once you have all of your paint colors mixed up and your gesso is dried on the shells, you want to take a larger plastic cup and pour your paints into them, and I'll show you the consistency here. You want them to all be about the same consistency, and just keep dripping, adding the colors in until your smaller cups are done. And by the way, that is freezer paper that I'm working over the top of. Now I'm adding a little bit of silicone, a few drops into the paint, and I'll keep adding more and more of these cups until they're all empty. And I used the silicone for the first time with this project the other day. You can do it with or without the silicone. I do prefer it a little bit with the silicone. I'm going to take some white acrylic paint, and by the way, I mixed the acrylic paint in a container with half, again, Floetrol and half of the acrylic paint. And I have a canvas here because one of the hardest things to gauge is how much paint you're going to need. So you tend to always have extra paint. So I'm going to let the extra paint drip off on this canvas, but with the canvas and the shells both, I'm going to add a coat of this white paint. And the reason for that is because as you pour the other paint cup over top of this, This wet paint allows it to flow much more smoothly over your surface. And you don't want to use gesso for this step. The gesso is more of a dry paint like chalk paint, and you really need the fluid acrylic paint here. So now you want to take, you can see why I'm wearing gloves, right? You want to take your first shell, and you can see how wet it is with the paint, and this is called the dirty pour. As you pour the paint over, and just start out with a small amount, you want the paint to drip down, so you'll move this shell around and you can see how all of the different colors are showing up. Isn't that pretty? I just started doing this and I'm so fascinated by it. I can't stop doing these projects. So you can see it's also dripping onto the canvas below. And what I'll do is pick up each one of these shells and continue to pour on the shell, move the shell around in different areas, but allow it to drip off onto the canvas. And it's okay if you take your popsicle stick. By the way, make sure you have only one popsicle stick per color when you're doing that mixing. You don't want to blend the colors. So I'm going to pick up another shell now, and same thing, I'm going to do the pour over this. And so you know, I watched a woman on YouTube last week do this over shells. And I don't know why. They started out like this, and then when she showed them after they dried, they had lost all of their color. Actually, they lost all of the variations of colors. It was almost like it was just one flat color. So I'm not sure what she did wrong. I don't think she was sure what she did wrong, but in experimenting, I had the same problem. Now I'm using the Floetrol and the silicone, which really did seem to help. That seemed to make a difference. My first attempt with the shells, I didn't do that. So I'm going to finish covering up the shells, allowing it to drip onto the canvas. And now I'm going to pick up the canvas and move the colors around here. While I'm doing this, I'm going to drip the paint off the canvas onto the shells. So look on the canvas. You can see how there are all of these different variations of color, how it's all moving around. I'm going to go back over the shell and drip right over the shell. And you can see a lot of this is going onto that freezer paper below. By the way, make sure the freezer paper is shiny side up. And it's okay along the edges if you didn't have quite enough paint to drip off, to go ahead and use your fingertips. And I still have a little bit of paint left in the cup, so I'm just going to pour it over the shell. And even though I've seen people add the silicone during the process like I already did, I'm still going to add a couple of drops of this just to experiment over this wet canvas. Now you know this is going to take a very long time to dry, at least 1 to 2 days, so 24 hours to 48 hours. So here's another thing. A lot of people take this blowtorch, it's a butane torch like you would use to make a creme brulee, and they run it over the surface, and that causes air bubbles to pop and more patterns to come out. I really don't notice that big of a difference when I leave this to dry without the butane or when I use the butane. So I'm just showing you this because most people on YouTube do use this butane flame over the surface of this, and I'll do it over the shells. I do think it's causing some of the silicone beneath to pop up through the surface, and that causes something called cells, which is very desirable when you're working with acrylic pours. But back to our shells, you can see the different variations of color that end up on your surfaces. This is all from the same cup, but some of them look a lot more green, a lot more blue. There's a bit of gold, green, pink going on in this one. So I'm going to leave all of these to dry for about 24 hours. Here we are the following day. These are all dried. This would look very nice as a patina if you could get the colors for the patina down right. but I still think these need a very high gloss over them. I'm going to use the triple thick glaze over these shells. I'm going to use the one that you paint on because it really gives what looks to me like a kiln-thrown piece of pottery. It's a really thick, rich glaze. Now, some people aren't wild about working with the triple thick. I want to make sure you know that you have to use a bristle brush. By the way, I use a little bit of Vaseline on a Q-tip around the inside of the lid of the triple thick jar, and that prevents it from gluing shut. Every time I try to open it, it's like it's glued on, but the Vaseline works wonders. So I'm carefully applying the triple thick. I'm using a bristle brush here. The sponge brush is what I think causes a lot of people aggravation. They don't know that you're not supposed to use a sponge brush for this. And one other problem might be if you go over one spot too many times, it can start to dry quickly and drag and cause bumps and things that aren't very attractive. So just make sure you work a little bit quickly, cover each space. If you work in very bright light, you can see where the gloss is. Cover your whole surface, and I'm going to put these aside to dry. You can use the spray on triple thick, but I have found nothing works as well as when you use the brush on, and you'll see that in just a minute. This actually dries a lot more quickly than you'd think it would. So through the magic of videography, I'm going to bring these back to you and show you how they look now that they're dry. So I'm going to take these outside in a minute because it's a little overcast, but there's a little bit more light out there than there is in here. But this is how the shells look now that they're done, they're dry. The high gloss on there really draws these colors out. Now I'm outside, so you can see it's a little overcast. But you can also see the different variations in these shells. I think that one's my favorite. But they all were done using the same pour. So I don't know how it is that some of them come up vibrant pink. I guess it's as I get near the end of the cup. The beginning of the cup starts out with some colors, and then as you get to the middle of the cup, it goes into others. We'll say that that one that has the heavy teal green up at the top right there, that one was from a different batch that didn't come out too well, so I did a pour over the teal. But you can see that one right there. You can see how this would look over beechwood. You could make a nice little project out of it doing just this. This is how the panel turned out. This is the canvas. Now this is pretty small, and what you could also do was, this is a panel that I used that's a longer panel, and it's different colors obviously, but I put the shells over top of that. This has a little bit of iridescence in it too, which is hard to see. But you could actually glue these shells to these panels and make some really pretty crafts with these, or just put one in the center of one of the canvas panels. Look at these shells. They just, to me, they look amazing. Shells are already pretty just in their natural state. But when you can add different colors to them and make them look a little bit more exotic, it's a lot more fun, certainly unique, and you could do this to match any room in your house. So that is how you do a dirty pour. That's what that's called. Dirty acrylic pour over these shells. And I will see you guys soon with another video. Feel free to ask me any questions that you'd like, and get in touch with me to let me know if you've tried this, because I have just had so much fun with this. And I'll see you guys soon. Thanks a lot, my friends. Thanks for joining me over here. Bye-bye.